Great. All right, so it's 7:30, so I would like to officially call to order the Concord Municipal Light Board meeting for March 30th. Sorry, I've got a little message on my screen here. Just a reminder, this is a meeting that was an ad hoc meeting, predominantly a follow-up meeting from our earlier March meeting. So we're going to be picking up where we left off from our last meeting. But before we get into the agenda, I just want to acknowledge that our next meeting is going to be April 13th. Just want to check, is everyone on the board able to make the next month's meeting? Any concerns?
I may be in Vermont. I may have weird internet service. I'm going to try.
Okay. All right. So we'll give it a shot, but all right.
Yeah.
I think Pam, you could probably call in too, if that's with a phone number. I think if that's an option. And with that, if there's any materials, we'll make sure that they're distributed in advance. Okay. Okay. Thank you. All right. So we do actually have a set of minutes that Alice had distributed. I think she collected comments. These are the minutes from December 8th. I just want to check and see if there are any additional comments on those minutes from the board. Okay, I am not seeing any. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I move we approve the minutes of December 8th.
Pam, is there a second?
I'll give it a second.
All right, I saw Brian first. You got the second. All right, I'll do a roll call. Pam?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Gordon?
Yes.
Alex?
Yes.
And Wendy's a yes also. So thank you very much. Those are approved. I do recognize that we have about, I think, 4 sets of minutes that are still due from the end of December, January, February, and our March meeting. So I know that Karen's working on those, and we're going to make a concerted effort to get those completed. So I know it's important. And Gordon, thank you for putting some notes together from our last meeting. I know you forwarded those to Pam. And I don't know, did you forward those to Karen as well?
No,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I did not. I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, could you do that? And can try to get those moved forward quickly.
And I guess I'm waiting for Karen to give me her best shot at minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll send those to Karen.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so we're going to move forward with our agenda today. I just want to note several members of the team here have a hard stop at 9 o'clock, so we're going to do our best to finish at 9. We have 2 agenda items. We're picking up from the long-term strategy review that we started last month. And just a reminder for the board, so the purpose of doing this review is obviously we're midway through the strategy, but our goal here is to recognize where we are in the strategy. And as a board, we need to determine whether the targets that we've established are still what we want to be targeting and within what time frame. So that's my goal in this review. And as it turns out, it's also our larger goal. So today we're talking through issues, we're identifying issues where we may have to change things. And then in a subsequent meeting, we need to sort of reestablish whether we're formally changing our goals and or when, if we're going to do that. So just as a quick reminder, when we reviewed this in March, there were a couple of things that we identified. Obviously, the NISC implementation is complete. With our AMI strategy, we recognize we're a little delayed. We are selecting our vendor in 22. We'll purchase supplies, but the board has to remember we have a funding issue that we need to address this year. So we have 3 million funded, but we're probably going to need more funding. So as a board, we need to discuss and plan for that additional funding and how, if we need a borrowing for that. So that's a topic for the board to review. In the PPA strategy, we've done a lot to increase the purchase of our RECs. We're a little behind our goal, but I think by year end 22, we'll be close to meeting our target for 100%. And then also just recognizing that we are well ahead of the retiring of the RECs with our converting our PPAs, which is great. So that's, kudos to Laura and the team for moving that forward. In our rate design, we have recognized that we have a target to get our fixed rate up to $30 for that residential in G1 by 2021. We have not achieved that. So I know next month in April, we're going to continue our discussions around rate design. And that fixed rate with the demand charge is our topic for next April. So the board, again, keep that in mind because we need to say, what are we doing on that fixed target, and that should play into our discussion. Again, that's why we're talking about these issues now. And in the fuel switching, we've made a lot of good progress. I think one of the things we acknowledge that to be in alignment with the town goals for fuel switching, we need to increase our target to 1,000 households to really meet the town target. So again, this is an opportunity for us to look at that strategy and say, is the target that we have appropriate, or do we need to support a different target? And then obviously we had also reviewed and answered questions around the EV. We've had a lot of success. I think we're not clear that we can attribute all of the EV to the adoption, like what drove all the EV adoption, but I think that's something we'll continue to look at and focus on. So what I wanted to do now is we had gone through the presentation, and then we had started to walk through questions and issues from that discussion, and we left off on the EV strategy, and I want to pick up now on the utility scale storage and ask the board to share any issues and questions they have as we go through these topics. And so I'll just start with the with the utility scale storage. In the presentation, we acknowledged the original strategy for the 5 megawatt battery storage. And it was acknowledged that the goal was to help shave the peak demand charges. But Dave, I also wanted us to just spend a little time and talk about two things. One was, about a year ago, we talked about whether a 5 megawatt battery was the right size battery. And we had talked at one point about maybe a 4 megawatt battery was a better sort of size from an ROI perspective. And I don't know if that is still our thinking. So do we still think that the 5 megawatts is what we would want to purchase, or did we think 4 megawatts was a better size?
We had been targeting 5 megawatts. And we, our most recent pricing that we got from vendors was for 5 megawatt, 10 megawatt hour battery. It was about 4.6 million. And then for a 5 megawatt, 20 megawatt hour was about 8 million. And we got prices from a couple different places. So, there's a pretty big range when you go from the 10 megawatt hour to the 20 megawatt hour, but it's a good chunk of money. And, that's what we've looked at. That was the most recent pricing we've got. And it may have changed since we got that last pricing, but that's kind of where we were with that. And we were looking at the 5 megawatt hour.
Okay.
Dave, can you repeat those numbers? So it was 5
Yep.
megawatts, 5 megawatt, 10 megawatt hour, 4.6 million.
Yep.
And then it was, what were the specs on the other one?
And so for the 5 megawatt hour, 5 megawatt, 10 to 20 megawatt hour.
So more duration is that higher price.
The higher price, and we got prices from a couple different vendors, and for the 20 megawatt hour, the ranges were from 8 million to 8.7 million, and for the 10 megawatt hour, it was 4.6 million to 5.1 million. So as you go up in the duration, the price goes up significantly.
Dave, can you tell me when you got these bids? I'm looking at the plan it says they were from 2017, and I'm wondering if that's the last time we looked at the cost of battery storage.
No, these prices came in the early part of the pandemic. So I don't have the exact date on me, but I would say 2020 to 2021.
And did we put out an RFP, or this was just a survey to figure out what our costs might be?
This was just a survey to kind of get a feel for where we were.
Okay.
In these prices, this is a purchase contract to buy the battery. Is there any kind of offer that would incorporate the regulation market, which I know is quite valuable for energy storage to reduce these costs.
So we currently are working with 2 different vendors for 2 different projects for, that scenario. And so the different arrangements would be PPAs. And then one that's new to us is an agreement. And basically you pay a monthly fee, so to speak, and you get the use of the battery. And how that agreement is arranged, we're waiting to see the agreement so we can have legal review it. So it's really new to us. So I can't really speak to it all that much, but it's different from a PPA.
Okay. And my understanding, and please correct me, is the regulation market could reduce this cost by about 50%.
Yeah, so, when we originally put the strategic plan together, our idea was to, shift the peak. And that's still important to us, but it's not the only thing that a battery would do. Obviously, we talked about saturation in the last meeting with solar. And so this would help with that. But, at the end of the day, you're really talking about the battery would have multiple purposes. One,
Right. So
one would
so
be the shifting the peaks. 2 would be helping with saturation, and 3, you could play in the frequency markets and get payment for it. And one of the proposals that we have that we're reviewing, the third party wants to play in the frequency market and
Okay.
wants to do a cost sharing with that. So we're looking at all the options.
So you are open to having energy storage do frequency regulation here in your territory?
We are, but I think the most important piece is handling the solar saturation.
So
Yeah.
Dave, can you reiterate our risks around solar saturation? Because it seemed to me that it was really our top priority. And so I think it's going to gate any substantial increase in solar that the light board would sponsor. Can you just speak to that again? So how much solar do we need? How much battery storage do we need to offset that risk before we even consider battery storage for additional solar in town?
So the issue is significant, and I don't want to sound like I'm scaring people, but I mean, the last couple of weeks we've had an engineer at the substation because it's mild out and it's sunny and the loads are getting low, so that we would transfer all the load onto one transformer so we wouldn't trip out the entire town. So it's significant. And how much we need, when you look at our load profiles during those low load levels, because of the solar generation, we're talking about having about 5 megawatts on one transformer and having less than 2 megawatts on another transformer. So a total of 7 megawatts. And I don't want to get into too much detail and bore you guys, but when you look at circuit loading, that drives what your minimum is. And so for the transformer that has 1.7 megawatts at the low periods, I would be comfortable bringing that up to 4 or 5 megawatts. So you're talking anywhere from 3 to 5 megawatts of storage would buy you some time. And that's why we were looking at a 5 megawatt, either 10 megawatt hour or 20 megawatt hour battery.
But in the long run, we're going to need more storage in town because we have ambitions to add more storage, there's more solar in town. So how do you see, I mean, there's the emergency of we need storage at the Forest Ridge substation such that we can manage that solar saturation that's happening from our existing utility arrays. we want to put on the middle school is going to have some storage, but any future projects, how are we going to create a process that we put solar with storage so that we can keep the pace of in-town renewables?
Well, I think, that's a complicated piece. But I think, at the end of the day, we're looking at, electrification in town, and the additional load is going to help with that. That doesn't solve the entire problem. If we get a battery installed and connected, that's going to take care of us for a period of time. How long is that? I don't know, but we've been talking about adding storage with solar as it comes on and gets interconnected. But
Well,
I
well,
guess
that has, so the increase in load is coming from heat pumps and EVs. And EVs, we're trying to focus on the nighttime hours, and heat pumps are weather dependent, and our issues are when heat pumps are not running. So I don't see load growth being a solution to allow more in-town solar, because it's the timing is not what we need.
that's a great point, Brian, and that's something that has to be factored into the equation. I do think load growth will help. It's not going to solve everything for sure, but when you talk about adding large scale solar in town, we're gonna run into a problem even with adding a battery storage device now. So I know the community wants more storage, more solar, but it is going to be an issue because we're at those low levels, and even when you add a battery, that's going to take care of us for what, 3 or 5 years, who knows.
So these sound to me like long-term problems that we have been putting off a discussion on for way too long. We've known that we need to manage the grid. We've known that we need a strategy for managing the peak and how to shave the peak. We haven't looked yet at anything beyond first cost of battery. It'd be really helpful for us to understand what are the economic benefits to the town of increased solar with battery storage. And in the long run, we really need to look at our grid, because I've heard you say that as we bring on more electrical load from a shift from fossil fuels to electricity, that you're concerned about our grid. I think we need a major investment along with utility storage and thinking about not the five-year strategy on our grid, but how our grid is going to be able to respond and manage the increased load that we're expecting from electrification. That's my 2 cents on that. Sorry.
I would add to that we need to incentivize or figure out a policy that brings in residential and commercial capital for the purchase of this equipment, and so that the utility can just pay to utilize those assets in town to help manage load. I mean, we have a shelved plan sitting there for a virtual power plant for town resilience. If we had that implemented, we'd have the tools to put in some kind of program that would have private capital, put these systems in place, and then as the utility uses it, we could pay them 80% of the avoided cost, or some kind of incentive to make them want to invest. So we need to look at those policies as well.
There's a lot on the table just on this issue alone, and I think this has to rise up to the top of what we've got to be thinking about as we go forward. It's great to look back and see what we haven't done or what we have done, but let's look back. We really need to be forward thinking about where we're heading, and do we have the capacity in town to get to where we want to be.
So if I may, we're talking about managing load and managing the whole system, but we've got to manage the way we talk about this stuff, because we have not successfully captured as a board the process going forward on how we're going to do the very things that Brian and Alice are talking about. So I think it's we talk about these things. I think we need an agreed upon plan for how we're going to discuss this stuff, with Dave providing the appropriate data and input. Because without that, we can talk around this whole set of issues forever. And maybe I don't know the location for placing such an agreement, but it may be something we need to do soon, or we'll just talk around this stuff more and more.
The purpose of this meeting is to stop, is to start talking and building real plans on these things, because we haven't. So reviewing the current strategy has been our operating plan. So now I want to go through all of it, understand where those risks are, and then we need to reprioritize and figure out where we're going to spend our energy. And that's really what this exercise is about.
It's
and I
great.
think it's bringing to the forefront the importance of that battery storage and how critical it is right now, and also needing to understand that longer term strategy and how it influences our ability to expand in-town solar as well, because that's critical as
Great.
well.
Great.
So,
Great.
talk a lot about battery. Are there new, Gordon?
One last comment. I've heard, frequency regulation, peak shaving, a solar saturation. I'd also add, maybe, I don't know what the right word is, and this is again, like Pam's point, like getting a coalition or coalescing our ideas around this, but it's something along the lines of microgrids or resiliency. I did happen to notice in the Cadmus report that the solar sites that were identified were at public spaces, right? Harvey Wheeler, the high school, Beatty Center. If there was a crisis, okay, if we got hit by a hurricane, or heaven help us, if the Russians struck, we could really use safe spaces that have battery and solar, and they could be community resources in the event of the unspeakable. I'm sorry, not to like head down that path, but it could be, garden variety kinds of disasters that could be really benefit from having in-town solar capability. And you don't want to just write them off and say, look, we've implemented a certain amount of solar. It creates these technical problems. We can't go any further without also putting a number of different uses. I think we've just listed 4 at risk. So it's kind of a balance. And if you can balance those, if you can include those and know how to work them in real time, you can actually make the economic viability. You improve the economic viability of the project if you can actually hit a bunch of those uses all at once. Thank you.
And Gordon, to your point, that is what that report outlines, that virtual power plant report from 2020 outlines. It's using energy storage for town resilience as well as for these other services to help lower their expense.
So Brian, I am not sure I'm aware of this virtual power plant summary. If you have access to that, could you send a link or something to the board?
Absolutely.
Okay, appreciate that. I just, one more comment here on the board strategy is that part of our walkthrough here is to make sure that we're integrating the client action plan targets. And I'll just note that the climate action plan also calls for battery storage of up to 60 megawatt hours. So while we've been talking about 10 to 20 hours through this 5 megawatt storage, the target under the climate action plan calls for substantially more, which is even more funding. So we need to reconcile our strategy along with the climate action plan and understand how that target was established and what the goals were behind that as well, which I assume is coupled with solar, but I don't have a history on how that target was established. And I don't know actually, Dave, or do we have how that battery storage target was established in the climate action plan? Do we know?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I have to take a look at it.
So Wendy, I can also add a link to the 2010, 2011. I can add a whole bunch of reports from previous efforts to that email.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, so let's move on. If there's no more comments on the utility scale storage, in the review of the plan, we had also acknowledged in the plan we had a strategy around smart thermostats, which for all intents and purposes is sort of on hold until we have the smart meters in place. So we didn't really have extensive discussion on that last month. And probably, will continue to be deferred until we have that in place. The next topic was around our energy efficiency programs. And I'll entertain Alice. I know you had shared some feedback or some questions about the energy efficiency goals. Do you care to comment any further on what you had shared?
So I was looking at the language, thank you for that. I was looking at the language from not just the slide, but looking at the strategic plan again. And it's caveated with a but statement. While it says that our goal is to reduce customer bills, it also reminds the reader and the town that when we do that, it reduces the revenues for CMLP. And for me, that feels like a disconnect because I don't think that revenues, we're not a company that's trying to drive our revenues to return have a return for our shareholders. We're the shareholders. So there's a disconnect if we're trying to lower our bills at the same time saying that we're going to lose our revenue. We have many revenue sources, and I think we're looking at this in a stovepipe way when we frame the problem in the way that we have, that there are multiple revenue streams as we're seeing. As we increase our electrification, we drive our revenues higher, and that we can withstand the energy efficiency that helps everyone. It helps the environment because we're bringing costs down, we're demanding less. And these aren't brought together in a synergistic way as we look at the way the plan is structured and the way that our thinking has structured it. And that's a problem to me because I think we have multiple pathways that we need to be considering. That the statement in the plan is that that our goal is to reduce customer bills. Well, that is one goal, not the only goal.
Right. And what you're describing, Alice, is called revenue decoupling.
Mhm.
And it's when, this is why we want to see a higher fixed charge. And it's because we want to allow the utility to collect for fixed cost recovery without hindering solar production or conservation efforts, which lower load and lower sales volume.
Great.
Just a comment on that. Just the original strategy, when we went through various initiatives, we evaluated it under three criteria. One was impact to revenue, impact to net income, and then GHG emissions. So I believe that may be where that came from, but I certainly agree with your comments in general as well. So, okay, anything else? Energy efficiency, I think.
I had a question when I looked at that plan again. It includes things like process heat in Concord. And I'm wondering, do we have any facilities that you make use of process heat, or is that just a catch-all phrase in the description of sources? I'm not aware of any processing in town, but maybe you are.
No. I'd have to look at it to answer that. I don't think so, but I'd have to check it.
So it's in the plan. It says that, that's part of what we consider. And I'm just thinking that as we go forward, that's something we probably want to address. We also have a goal of 1.5% of sales as being the energy efficiency goal for the town. And that seems, is that a goal that we should be happy with, that 1.5% of our revenues goes towards energy efficiency, which is probably, to me, one of the greater equalizers of the transition that we're all embarking on away from fossil fuels. I know that the IOUs have a much higher investment in energy efficiency programs, and it's the first entry point for every homeowner to be able to do something about their bills and their energy use. So I'm wondering, should we look at this goal as 1.5 realistic? Is it, underestimating the potential and the need? It seems.
I think you have to factor in, the rates and that sort of thing, because 1.5% of sales is a pretty decent number. The IOUs have different funding than we do. So if you want it to be, let's say 3%, rates would increase, and you guys would need to talk about that. And are you comfortable with it? And so that's a strategy that the board could look at and change if they wanted.
So I'm just suggesting that as we look at our rate structure, and I know we're going to come back to the subject again in April, I think in our plan also say we want to keep our rates low. The reason that the IOUs can invest more in energy efficiency and do more in energy efficiency is because our rates are higher. And there are apples and oranges every time we look at all of the other municipal light plans. We look at the rate structure, we see where we fit in that spectrum, but we're not looking at the services that we provide or other utilities provide that will get us closer to where our goals are. So it's not apples to apples in this analysis when we're looking at it. And so I would argue that, in terms of financial equity and home equity, that we need to think about providing the right level of services that brings everybody into the fold here, that we can reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. And I think that energy efficiency is the starting point for every investment that homeowners make.
Alice, can I just ask, one question was, the target is based on sales. Is that the right way to measure it?
That's a good question. That's a really good question.
I just wanted to, I mean, Alice has just made a wonderful set of comments. I just wanted to make sure foundationally we are ready to talk about whether keeping rates down is a reasonable or even doable kind of aspiration, given what our needs are and given how they may underestimate the actual cost of everything that we're doing greatly. So I just want to make sure we come back and revisit, make sure our bedrock assumptions are not necessarily to keep rates down, because I think that is a major inconsistency with what we are trying to do, and frankly with the cost from the most macro to the most micro of trying to achieve what the town wants to achieve with its with all of the goals related to energy.
I'd like to take the idea of managing rates to be more about managing the cost of CMLP's operations to facilitate energy. Because if we talk about the whole retail rate, things like supply issues with natural gas have big effects on our rates that we have little to no control over. I think we need to start looking at how are we spending the 30% of every kilowatt hour on different efforts, and understanding that we may desire to do all of these efforts, but we do have to keep the clean energy source at a low cost. That is very important to fuel switching and other adoption efforts to make sure this can scale. So yes, we need all these programs, but we do have to be conscious about the cost of facilitating these, raising the prices.
That's correct, but our primary goal isn't to keep it low. We have to find a balance, right? So we need green energy too, and that comes at higher cost potentially. So
finding a balance. Yeah.
We do have many upcoming meetings to talk about rates, so we'll have plenty of opportunity to discuss our philosophy and leading toward the end of the year when we have to really evaluate new rates. So in time of use. So, all right. Any more questions on the energy? Okay. I'd like to move forward now onto the solar capacity, the solar goal. And I just want to acknowledge something with this. We've had a lot of feedback on the slides and the presentation on solar, but I just want to acknowledge when this strategy was developed, I joined the board in 2017, and that's when we started the strategy. The strategy did not initially even have a solar target in the plan. And it was added based on feedback. I think, Brian, you were one of the advocates for making sure solar was considered.
It was an existing effort that was decided before the document was scoped that it should be removed, and it was citizen outrage that brought it back.
So my point is, it wasn't in the original plan, and that. Not that it wasn't important to the board, it's just a matter, I think at the time it was a matter of prioritization within the strategy. It was added back into the strategy. I just want to acknowledge that the actual goal that's actually in the version 4.0 of our strategy really speaks to solar rebates and increasing the target metric was around increasing residential solar, and it was measured based on the rebates. So that was not necessarily clearly shared in our presentation last month. So I just want to acknowledge that. And, I, as a board member over the last few years, just want to acknowledge that building in-town solar was not necessarily what I understood that solar goal to support. Now, I'm just saying that I understand there were former discussions and targets and goals that the board had established around solar, and we're going to have a lot of opportunity to talk about that when we get also to our discussion on Article 38. But I just want to acknowledge as a board member, my thinking on the solar, I wasn't advocating or thinking of or planning for advocating for in-town solar unless it was sort of brought to our attention and it was an opportunity, but it hasn't been the big focus of our strategy. So I'm just acknowledging that as a board member. And in terms of the target, I don't know actually if we've achieved that target or not, but strategy was calling for an increase of, I think, 50 new installations by 2025. I don't know if we've achieved that goal, but I think the real question is, what do we want this solar goal to be as part of our strategy moving forward? And so that's the discussion that I think the board really needs to grapple with. And at the same time, acknowledge that we do have the climate action plan that does call for 20 megawatts of in-town solar to be built. We have not talked about that goal specifically as a board as part of our strategy. But there's also increasing in residential targets in the plan as well. So I just want to acknowledge that as the chair on the board around what our goal was. And this is clearly a place where I think we need to define a better target of what our strategy is intending to do in the solar area. We've been doing a lot to promote it, but just think that we as a board need to be more explicit around our goals here.
So I think you're right. You framed that really well. But I think I'm going to go back to something that Pam said, which is that we need a plan for how and when we're going to actually get into the nitty-gritty design of that, of our goals. And we can't do it as a group of 5 of us. We need to bring the community into this conversation, because this conversation was had during the development of the Energy Futures Task Force. It was part of the development of the Climate Action Plan. So we're the ones that haven't brought our issues to the public. And I think it's time that we do that, and to be transparent about how we develop, whether it's a 20 megawatt goal for solar, or whether we install batteries and at what cost. These are public concerns. And I think we have to be cognizant that we don't make the ultimate decisions without, without touch points of knowing where the community stands on all this. And I think Pam's right. We need a strategy. When do we talk about this? We don't have time today. Well, how and when? We've now deferred several big conversations to some other time to discuss. And, I think Pam's right. We need to figure out how and when.
And we need a buy-in from the leadership at the light plant to give us the data we need and actively participate in drilling down deep.
Go ahead, Gordon.
When I first got involved in or interested in town committees and so forth, I attended a number of light board meetings where I can't remember the light board chair at the time, but then later Hugh Lauer was chair, and he talked about a goal for solar, for in-town solar of, hey, let's implement 25 megawatts of in-town solar, and let's do it in 5 projects spread 5 years apart of 5 megawatts each. And we've made that was before I think maybe Alcott might have occurred soon after that. We didn't really have much at the time that he was laying out that goal. We've made progress towards it. Then it got dropped from the plan. Now there's talk about bringing it back. The question is that kind of a long-term, 25 years, 30 years? Is that the optimal framing of a long-time goal? And as you go along within those 25 years, when do you take a heads up and look around and say, hey, does this goal still make sense? One of the challenges is, how do you find enough land That's a lot of land that you need for installation that size. And, Grace is pretty big, and that didn't get us all the way there. So anyway,
So I
So
think
can I speak to that real quick?
Yeah.
So, Gordon, you say the plan got dropped. I think when that plan was laid out, we had no idea that we were going to have a saturation issue. And, we've felt that along the way. And, that's really the big thing. And you're right, land, where you site this stuff is an issue because, any place you want to put it, the neighbors don't want it. And, so
Yeah.
for us to say we don't want to do it, that's not necessarily the case. We do want to do it, but we have a saturation issue and we have location issues. And then you have, the return on the investment. And so from a financial standpoint, we have to look at that as well. And you have to balance, what makes sense in terms of, do we want to be spending, X amount per kilowatt hour on a calculation for in-town solar when we can get a renewable source out of town for lower. So
Yeah.
there's a balance there, and we have to factor that into the equation.
So I think you do bring up a very good point, Dave. And I was going to make a similar comment that when we look at what is the lowest cost method of bringing in town solar, the answer is always clear cutting, ground mounted array for the utility. We need to, as a board, develop policies for residential, commercial, and utility such that we focus on dual land use. It is less cost efficient to do a residential rooftop solar array on a per kilowatt hour basis. But again, it's about creating the right policies that engage private capital to put up the funding to give them the confidence to move forward so they can help us meet their goal. We can't look at solar as a single thing for in town. We need to break it up into policies for residential solar acceleration, commercial solar acceleration, and utility solar acceleration. Land use, there was a 2011 report done about where can we put solar in town. It was scoped just to look at town properties. That is very limiting, and most of the answers were, let's put it around our wells because there's a lot of town-owned land to ensure we have a clean water supply, and we could put solar there as well. There's opportunities for placing solar on town property, but I don't think we should be limited to that. I think looking at agrivoltaics and Verrill Farm, how can Verrill Farm grow shade plants while having solar arrays above, because we have a good commercial policy around in-town solar. And where and when do we need to put into those policies that it's on the customer to put in storage because we can't have growth? These are the details that we want to get into in these in-town solar discussions that we really have struggled to do so.
I just want to also remind everyone that when we rely on individual rooftops or individual projects where the installer or owner of that system retains sells those RECs on the market, that's not our green power supply. We've talked about that, but I want to remind us that that's the case. We have it in the slide that we have so much, whatever percent or whatever number, I don't have the slide up, for residential, cumulative 4.3 for residential and commercial capacity added. If the owner sells the RECs, which we could not find a way to retire our RECs, we spent a good part of 6 months looking at how we could retire our RECs, and it was not possible to do on a rooftop solar project. We can't count that as our solar in-town solar capacity because it's not green for us until we totally paid off the system, which is coming along quite soon. And the strategic plan acknowledges that. So there's a disconnect of how we can count it in the slide, but the strategic plan reminds us that we can't count that as solar capacity in town. We have to be honest with how we present the data.
No, I agree, Allison. I think that while Dave mentioned the ROI, retaining those racks is part of that, and it makes it very challenging.
It does. I agree. but we have to be honest in how we use that data to support a goal that we think is either attainable or not. And I think Dave's right. We need to look at Brian too, the least cost approach for reading our sustainability goals. And we arbitrarily pick a number for solar capacity or solar development in town. It's laudable, but maybe it's not the smartest strategy. We have to look at an integrated approach, which this fails to do for us.
Just circling back, I agree with you, David. I mean, that was a plan that was laid out very early and it didn't take into account, it didn't foresee these difficulties. So.
So this has been very, very good discussion. Clearly, the board needs a lot more time to strategize on some of these key issues. I think I'd like to stop here. We're gonna probably move on to our next item, which is evaluating our position on Article 38, which probably a natural extension of this discussion we were just having on solar.
Wendy,
So with that, yes.
just as a point of clarification, on this agenda item, I'd like the board to take a position on 38 and 39.
Oh,
And
okay.
39 is more of a, it should pass, but that's light plan expenditures and payment in lieu of taxes. And that's on proposed to be on the consent calendar.
So fair point. Thank you, Dave.
Right.
Let's Article 39 up first. As many of you know, this is the article that approves the light plant expenditures as well as the pilot, both of which we have reviewed as part of our board budget approval process. And Dave gave a good presentation along with Jason at the public hearing. I don't know if everybody had a chance to see that. Assume you did. Let me ask the board, are you comfortable in taking a position on Article 39? Or do you have any open questions on Article 39? Gordon, sorry.
Go ahead, Gordon.
Yeah, I'm generally supportive of this. I just wanted to say one item that the Fiber Completion Task Force has been deliberating is whether or not the telecom division should be paying a franchise fee. You could consider it to be sort of parallel to the one that Comcast pays, but given that our division is so small and is still in a growth phase, it may not be appropriate. I'm not sure if that's actually considered in this particular warrant article or if it has its own.
So
if that's broken out separately.
So the pile-off is part of, it is in our budget. So it is an expense there. It was implemented a couple of years ago. This won't be the first time we're paying it. It's a payment in lieu of franchise is what pile-off stands for. And, that was established a couple of years ago. So I don't see it going away. As Comcast revenues drop and we're picking up customers, there's an argument to be made that we should be paying that. And, that's what the town decided. So it is in there. It is in the budget. So it is part of the enterprise piece too. But
It's not something the light board ever voted on though, right?
no.
It was decided by the town manager that the telecom business should basically pay the what is it, Minuteman Media Network to support them. And what I'm asking, the reason why it's worth reconsidering is that we're trying to, if we're gonna make the Concord broadband available to as many residents who want it. There are plenty of residents that can't get it right now because the fiber hasn't made it down their street. So, it's a build out phase. There's still a need for capital. And, at some point the business will reach a steady state where it can sustain, basically a payment like that. But have we actually gotten there? Is it a little bit premature?
So, if you look at the budget, you'll see that telecom is revenue positive, and it's been for 3 years now. So it's self-sustaining at this point.
David,
Right, but we don't, okay, anyway, that's the
Okay.
point I wanted to make. Thank you.
I only had one comment on 39, which was, Dave, when you were presenting, you were asked a question about the PCA and whether or not it was focused on the winter spike or if it was averaged over the annual year. And you said it was focused on the winter spike in prices, but it is not. This board voted to do the annual, and I voted for the spike, but this board decided the annual. So that was the only, I mean, it was a great presentation. You did a good job explaining it and answering questions and deferring to those who were the experts when you were asked certain questions. So it's a good job, and it's great that it's still on the consent calendar. But that was the only thing that I had a comment on.
Thanks for that.
I'll just comment in the presentation, Dave, you did do a great job. The one comment that came from citizens was a question about our power supply mix, which aligns with one of the goals topics that we as a board said we would review, which was our evaluating the percentage of our power supply that's nuclear. A year ago, when Alice helped facilitate the board's goals, this was a topic for us to review. So I'm just reminding you all that when we go back and review our goals again, that's another one that we need to reevaluate as part of our rate. So that's also on our radar screen. So,
And I would also suggest that that is more than a board decision. That is a community decision. It's very controversial. And I think that demands the engagement of our community, of our stakeholders and our customers.
You're talking about nuclear?
Yeah,
And how does one do that?
public meeting, public outreach.
I mean, all of this, forgive me, but all of this requires a lot of planning.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on here.
Right.
And what do we mean? I just think that there is an enormous need to really comprehensively think about what are the issues in front of us and how do we get where we need to go, including factoring in public engagement. I mean, it all seems extremely time-consuming, ambitious, needed, but I don't see us operating in any meaningful way where we can provide meaningful input without designing a process where we think about this in an orderly fashion with real serious input from the light plant leadership, which will itself require a devotion of resources and time by it.
So to that point, do we need another staff level or direct report for Dave to do all this project management? I mean, it's Dave, you've got a busy job. You've got a lot of hats you wear. You've got great staff that all have their own roles and responsibilities, but the planning behind achieving the strategic plan really needs focus and organization and real research into these questions and proposing solutions. It really needs a lot of focus, and do we need the staff resource to do that?
Also, I would add, I think that's a really important point, and I would add that I think the board has to think about its real role here because we can be a kind of 90,000 feet, not even 30,000 feet, sort of enabler of what the light plant wants to do. And because we have tremendous faith in the light plant, I think it's often not a hard path to follow. But if we want to be a board that's really engaged in meaningful participation in 30,000 feet, and frankly, down a little deeper, is there a need for some kind of staff support? I think we need to reevaluate how much we are actually able to perform that kind of a function, or are we actually more just a backup support to in a context that we are not entirely familiar with because of the nature of the way we have to decide things and the time we have to do that and the current support that we're getting.
Thank you, Pam. I appreciate that. It's very clear that there's consensus across the board that we need to spend some time and energy on how we're going to do our planning going forward. We may need additional resources. I'd like to suggest that we have some of that discussion in our next meeting in April.
Great.
We can't belabor here. We all know that we need to do it. And it's very clear there's a lot on the plate here, and we're not going to be able to do it all. We need to prioritize and really figure out what is most critical and how we're going to approach this, including the community engagement. So,
And I would just add one thing. I would recommend that we look at what Chris Whalen signed as the charge of the light board, if it's still extant, that I think was signed in 2018 or something. We need to know what our job is too.
I think it was 2008. It's much
It's
older.
old. Yeah.
It's not-
It's been amended 3 times, and each time it's a couple decades between it. So it might be time to take a look at it.
I think it was 2018, the last one I looked at.
Okay.
I can distribute the most recent copy to the board.
that'd be great, Dave. Appreciate it. All right, so I need to get us back on topic here. So we were discussing Article 39, which is the light plant expenditure as well as the pilot. We've had some good discussion around the franchise. We have already voted in support of our annual budget. So let me ask if can I entertain a motion to approve Article 39?
I move that we vote to approve Article 39 as proposed in the warrant.
I second.
I second. Yeah.
Hold on. I think it's affirmative action on Article 39 is what.
You're right, correct language.
Okay.
I first that we vote affirmative action on Article 39. Thank you.
Second.
Second first. Okay, so roll call. So Alice,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
and Gordon.
Yes.
And Wendy's a yes. So thank you all. Appreciate that. All right. So we will move on to Article 38. And again, we need to make a position. It's either affirmative action, no action, or no position. We've had a lot of good discussion in our discussion around solar. This article asks that we address the intent of the climate action plan and establish a plan for building out the 20 megawatts of in-town solar by the 2030 timeline. So let me just open the floor up to the board. We've had a lot of good discussion. I don't want to reiterate it, but let me ask the board to comment on your perspective on this article.
Oh, I think we're already, the act of having this article come to town meeting has prompted the discussion at the board about solar. So if you listen to our earlier discussion today, we're already thinking about this kind of stuff. So I think this was the petitioner, was a catalyst to have these discussions happen in town. I'm supportive of passing this article. The only concern I have is the deadline written within it of 2020. It is needed to be done.
2023.
This year, it's 2022.
Yeah, it's 2022,
before- sorry, you're right.
the end of 2022.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry.
So I think we could accomplish that, but it would take a lot of focus, a lot of dedication to meet that deadline and do it well. We could do it easily by 2020 with what we have and kind of walk our way through it, but I don't think that's what the desire of the board is. It's really to develop the strategy well. And so that's my only concern, but I'm supportive of it, and that's where I am right now.
So Brian, I share your concern. I guess the other concern I have is that this is not just a light plant. We can't do this alone. We need the community, to earlier comments about how we would do this. We need school support potentially and other participants. So I'm concerned about their commitment to be able to meet a similar deadline. And obviously the board's time and energy, I just don't think the end of this year is feasible given the other priorities that we have.
I just want to remind that this is the development of a plan to do this. So yes, we need to identify our stakeholders and partners in a plan, but I don't know that we need to actually have agreement that we're going to put solar on the roof at the high school by a certain date. But we have to know that this is one of the things I guess I was surprised to see that there was such a detailed study of solar capacity in town from a 2020 report, because that would be an enormous, I don't know, maybe I missed it somewhere since 2020 when the report was finalized.
Yeah, so you know what, this is a good point, Alice. I think we should just take a quick moment to reiterate what work has been done or not done. And Dave, I know Amanda's actually with us here as well. So Dave, can you quickly speak to the Kearsarge study that was done? I know there was and I don't know if this was done under Kate Hanley also. There was a study done to look at all possible in-town solar locations, if you will. And I think, Brian, maybe you were alluding to that earlier. That's where there was some.
So there was,
Lots potentially.
to my knowledge, there was a couple efforts. It was a 2011 effort to look at town properties. And then Jill Appel around 2017 made another effort for town buildings. There was the Meta grant that we received in 2020 that looked at 3 buildings for solar and storage. But again, all of these are focused on town properties. And if we're going to really meet our goal without using up all of our town land, we're going to need to look at the other 2 big sectors, which is commercial and residential.
Can we just actually, if you're here, there was a study, the Cadmus report, that was a focus at the high school and a number of properties. Amanda, are you on? Can you speak to that now? It's a little unfair because Amanda wasn't here when this was put together, but I do understand that under the sustainability efforts, we did hire Cadmus to do an assessment of targeted town properties. And so, Amanda, can you speak to just recap what that study did? And
yeah, certainly.
Thanks, Amanda.
So in my reading of this plan, it actually is written from the perspective of if the town were to purchase the solar and put it on these different sites and then pay off that solar with the energy savings from doing so. So it's a bit different because I feel like it's more targeted towards what the town could do to advance the goal versus what CMLP would be doing to advance the goal. So the Cadmus report is a little bit of a different take than sort of asking the light board to do it. It's sort of asking the town to do it. It did focus on the BD Center, the high school, the library, and it makes some recommendations on what we could do to max out the sites, but it also took into account if we didn't want to cut any of the trees or replace the trees with smaller shrubs, what is the extent that we could build without doing that? And with that, it gets us to around 470-ish kilowatts of power that could be out on the BD, the high school, and the library. It also talks a bit about the battery support and the payback of those different options. And the payback periods in there sort of range from, I want to say like 12 up to 20 years. So it is sort of a longer payback period, depending on how you look at it. If you're sort of a business, maybe you're looking for a shorter return on investment, but for the town, maybe it could be longer, but also thinking about the lifespan of those and when they might be replaced and what could happen in a 20-year payback period or a 12-year payback period. So there is a lot of good information in there, but it is slightly a different focus since it is focused on what the town could do rather than the light plant.
Amanda, just correct me if I'm wrong, because when I read that, the best ROI was to do the solar without battery storage. And obviously that's maybe not what we want. When you talked about ROI, was that inclusive of the battery storage?
Yeah, there are some statements in here that, do say that the battery doesn't really provide much of a return on investment. There are tables that will include it it includes both the solar on its own and then solar with the battery. So I think it's got both in there. In some cases, it does increase the return in investment by several years. Sometimes it's just 1 year. So each site and kind of combination of things is a bit different.
But I think one of the things the cabinet's report also does, it talks about the need for curtailment when we have very large scale solar influx into our system. And it also is what the first study I think the town has had the opportunity to review that looks at the social cost of carbon, which I think is significant. And as we move forward, it's not a first cost and it's not an ROI that necessarily drives our decision making, but the long-term social cost of capitalism is significant as we move into a carbon constrained environment. So I don't know if I missed the 2020 report, but I thank you for sending it now. It's really helpful and it's timely as we're considering Article 38. And I have to just say, I support Article 38 because it takes us to the next level. It looks like we've been working on some of this stuff, but we have just missed the opportunity to develop the actual plan that says what's our goal, how are we going to get there, and lay out our strategy. And so I strongly support Article 38.
Alice, can I ask you to clarify your interpretation of a plan? My concern is that a plan for some people wants a detailed plan that is going to show exactly how we would get to that goal by 2030, not just a plan to get to a plan. So help me understand what you would envision included in a plan.
Well, we don't actually, what we have is a bunch of data and we don't have any way to move forward on data. We've already heard that the town is interested in expanding solar capacity on in-town solar capacity. Whether that number is 20, 15, or 25 is probably still out for refinement, but we don't have any way of knowing, do we have a firm goal and how are we going to meet that goal? Right now, it's just data. So as long that I find is the problem with our light board, that we oftentimes talk around issues and we don't have our path forward to getting to our next step. And I think that this is something concrete that says we need a plan to figure out if we want to do this, how would we do this? Do we want to do this? It doesn't say out you shall do it. It says be transparent. Tell us what you know. Tell us what you've figured out on maybe this cabinet's report is the base of this. But it's a call for transparency. You can't just write out a goal that's been established by the town in multiple documents and decide that we can't do it without a consultation with the community that helps establish the goals.
So your plan might actually envision something that says we can't achieve the goal.
It's possible.
I'm just being open. I just want to understand.
I think that that's a reasonable thing to include in a study about implementation, like understanding, as we talked earlier, about multidimensional revenue streams, the multidimensional options on the least cost approach for meeting our carbon emissions goals, and where this fits in. This is a lofty goal, and it has to be part of our bigger strategy. But so far, we talk around the issues and we're not getting to actually making decisions on any of these. And I find that personally frustrating as a board to say, well, what did you accomplish? Well, we talked a lot.
Well, then worse, we then become enablers of decision-making that we, in fact, did not have any engagement with in a meaningful way, which is very unsettling to me. The board, has responsibilities and I don't know that we can, perform them without much more than we're doing. And the planning process, I think, is a start there.
So, Gordon, your hand's been raised for a while. So, Gordon, if you could comment.
Okay. We're talking about a plan. Maybe instead of a plan, what we need is an understanding of the financial models. Amanda said something a second ago, which I thought that really got me thinking, and that was that she said that the Cadmus report actually used a slightly different model. I mean, if I'm using the right word, in terms of ownership by the town, or that the town would buy these resources and then make them available, and then they could be analyzed in an ROI basis for kind of return it delivered to the town. I'm aware of several different funding mechanisms that have occurred in town, and maybe you could add to these, but we've got the PPA model, and that is traditionally dependent upon the SREC revenue stream. That's gone now. So as we make plans, we'll think about, okay, we might do a PPA, we'll bring in someone to build an array for us, and we'll pay them a levelized cost, a payment for, we'll pay them a certain amount per kilowatt hour for the power that they provide us. And they take care of the rest. They fund it. We don't actually really care what the interest rates are or anything like that, or even what the total cost of the plan is, because we've signed a contract that gets us this much power at this price. That's one model. Another model is at Alcott. They put a relatively small array up there, and I think that they used BD money or something else to pay for it. That's a little bit closer to what I think the Cadmus report describes. I don't know how many opportunities there are for more of that. And then another model is the rooftop solar, the residential solar. There's one where the owner, the homeowner, or maybe it could be a commercial, it could be a business, pays for the grid themselves, and then the financial model is based on our net metering policy. Maybe there's others, but are these the models that we need in order to move forward? Have some of those models actually become obsolete because of changes in federal tax policy or so forth? And in a way, it's not a plan. But if we understood those and could describe them and understand how the environment for these are changing, then that would be a basis for moving forward and understanding what is possible as we move forward.
So if I can real quick.
Can you wait, Dave? Can you just comment on that?
Yeah, so what Gordon was talking about, it's not the Alcott school, it's a Willard school, just for the record.
Oh, thank you. Right, you're right, sorry.
And the funding on that, we had a grant, the light plant chipped in and the town chipped in. So it was a tri-party type of thing. So I just want to make sure that's clear.
Thank you.
I just want to make a suggestion. I mean, the question, what is a plan, it's very makes this whole thing even more poignant in a way. Can I just maybe suggest that sometimes having a straw plan provided by somebody can jumpstart the board? I mean, maybe the light plant's leadership or it could provide a straw plan for us to even just look at, or perhaps the sustainability director could provide that. But I don't know how we're going to get at coming up with the plan that is the roadmap forward on the big issues without a little bit of just a straw of some sort. I mean, I just don't see how it's going to happen.
So Pam, there is quite a lot of plans around solar that exist. They all have different scopes. And I think a review of all of those plans will create what you're asking for, which is kind of a skeleton framework to then edit versus a blank piece of paper to start from.
Well, yeah, framework is a word that works for me, but I just don't see how we're going to even get to the point where we have kind of a basic frame of the actual issues over time with the primary elements of citizen engagement, for example. I just, I just don't know how to work.
So we do. I mean, Concord has a lot of experience with solar. We've got a lot of various studies. We've got policies that have been in place since 2008 or 9. We have commercial properties with PPAs. We have done utility scale solar. We've done a residential solar programs. We have a lot of this. It's just all diffuse and dispersed. So
I get that. I'm just saying we need somehow and I don't want to spend more time on it. The idea that we're asking what do we mean by a plan suggests to me that we need to have a straw point or a point. Just tell me what our next step is in terms of coming up with the thing that we're all really, really eager to have, which is a planning process for all of these fairly profound questions we're raising, you know?
Right.
That's all I'm saying. So just what is the next
So-
step? Give me a next
So
step.
the Article 38 asks for a plan to achieve our targets, and a plan and a schedule to achieve our targets is what it's requesting. And in order for us to do that, we do have to go through our history, summarize, create that level of knowledge within the plan before we can say, well, this is our, based on that knowledge, this is our plan going forward. I think that could be done before the deadline of the end of 2020, but that would be like a huge lift and it would distract us from many other projects. So again, that's the process we do need to do as a board and we've been putting off. But it's the deadline's the only concern I have in the article. And it's because of those reasons.
Let me ask a question. You can also make some other statements about this. It sounds like there is some general support for a plan, but a significant concern around staff resources and the board's ability to support building the plan by the end of the month. If we were in support of this plan, do we have an ask for resources to help facilitate it? Because I think we have too much on our plate. If we want to support it, then we could also ask for resources from the town to help facilitate that.
Just like the AMS project, I think it would be great to have a consultant help us do that project management and efforts. So a funding request would be appropriate. I mean, that in order to do this really correctly, we need to bring in someone to help project manage this plan development.
Let me ask the other question is, would we at the same time say that year-end 2022 might be too aggressive, and therefore we would look toward maybe a report by the end of, I don't know, June 2023? And part of it is, I'm not meaning to elongate it. I'm just trying to be practical. There's so much going on. I just don't think it's feasible. So I would look for some flexibility and sort of a longer duration for getting that together.
I agree. I'd like a longer duration, but I do not want the end of 2023 or 2024 to be where we are, because we'll forget. We'll miss it. It will get into the noise of these agendas and we'll miss it. So I think having some kind of reasonable deadline, like a June of 2023, might work.
Gordon?
Yeah, just reviewing the Cadmus report, I thought it was excellent. I also thought that it was in some ways dated. One of the techniques that we've used in laying out the plan is to try to identify dependencies. And I actually think that there's some dependencies in a potential solar plan on what we're doing now in terms of rate design and AMS. And here's an example. It says that they don't really think that there's going to be an economic benefit to the batteries. Well, wait, hold it. What if the solar were like integrated after we have the time of use rate structure? And then any battery would be automatically able to generate an economic return just by time shifting. So there's a case where they didn't know that that was on the roadmap at the time that they wrote that report. So we need to update. And maybe if the next report were written for us instead of to the town, it would be something that would be more actionable. But I agree with I think there's an overload right now. We've got to get the AMS project put to bed before we can take on another complex thing.
Oh, AMS is going to take a lot of staff time for the next year, 2 years. I mean, it's and it should be the priority. If I was forced to make a priority, I would put AMS above solar. Now, I highly value both, but again, we have limitations in staff's ability to do their normal functions as well as take on these projects the board is giving, and I think we need resources. But yeah, I had another comment, but I've forgotten it, so I'll wait.
So Wendy, could I add something in here? So AMS is obviously the priority right now that Brian just mentioned. The next priority for us is battery storage. And that priority is higher than solar right now, based on what I've talked about for years, right? About saturation. And so I think, I hope the board recognizes that that is far more important than additional in-town storage, solar at this point.
I do. I very much realize that storage is important. Since WR Grace has gone in, we've asked the question of, solar saturation, how are we going to handle it? Is it going to be an engineering effort and contracting with Eversource and the substation? Is it going to be curtailment? Is it going to be utility scale storage?
I mean,
And it's been 5 years and we haven't made a decision.
can I just suggest that we need to look at, I don't like to load consultants into things unless we need to. And I think maybe what we're looking at, and it's a theme that I think I embrace, which is that we have a lot of things that we need to do to meet the energy challenges that this planet faces and the town faces, and to address the voted upon desires of the town. And I think it's high time that we really look at staffing at the light plant to better attend to these very new and forming requirements to intelligently move our energy future forward. So I would say maybe we're talking about fundamental staffing questions, which I think are the charge of the light board to address with the light plant leadership. So I would add that into the mix. Maybe we want to say that we need, there needs to be a relook at the staffing to make sure that the priorities of the town are addressed by the light plant.
So all of this conversation is really helpful and helps us think about, yes, setting priorities is critical. There are several ways for us to be able to develop a plan for solar and what our solar goals are. One is to develop a task force to help us do some of the legwork. And the second would be to hire a consultant to help us by leading the effort forward. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be chewing gum and writing the report at the same time. We should be able to do more than one thing. And I think the capacity, if we are limited by capacity, that goes into our plan and say we are limited by staff capacity, and you start building a case for what we need for the resources to get the services that I think the community is asking for from the light plant. So I think it's critical that we do this plan. I think there's a way for us to do it. I think that we can acknowledge the faults and the shortcomings as we think about how we want to integrate solar into the future of our supply. And that failure to do that because we're doing AMS sets it aside or AMI for another yet to be determined future plan or project that we never get to. And so, I would think that there is a way for us to move forward, even though there's a lot of, concern about how much we have on our plate right now. We will always have a full plate. This is a rapidly changing technology and system.
I just want to comment. I want to let Dave speak to this. So I'm concerned that I would like to support it, but I also think that hiring a consultant puts added weight and burden on Dave and his team, and it puts our other priorities at risk. So I kind of would like to hear from Dave if it's his perspective on, obviously additional staffing is probably good, but would a consultant detract your team from accomplishing the goals that we know we must commit?
So when you bring a consultant on there, it doesn't, take the load off of the staff, right? They do a lot of work, but there's a lot of staff work involved with the consultant. Brian can speak to it firsthand from seeing what's happening with the AMS. That is a huge load on myself and a lot of my team, right? And, you bring in a consultant to do another thing and it's just going to add more. So that continues to be an issue. And that's where we have to prioritize what is the most important things right now.
And that's a very good point, because Jackie, as the consultant for AMS, it allows that project to have focus and see it to the conclusions that the board wants, but it does create demands, immediate demands on staff time. So I can understand how multiple consultants would increase the load to staff, but I think this is the limitations of staff resourcing to address these issues has been an ongoing issue. It is a core reason for a lot of the reasons why we're not hitting the timelines that we're trying to. So I would love to see someone reporting to you, Dave, that was just on the strategic plan and working through all of these issues as the point person, as staff. That would allow you to throttle how much engagement they have with other staff on these projects because of priorities. So it's a resource. I think it would be very helpful. But
I mean, if I may, I'm in support of Article 38. I also am not in favor of throwing consultants at things. I think that this is time consuming, but we cannot make intelligent choices and decisions if we don't have a staffing plan from Dave that gives us what is currently able to be done and what he needs in terms of in-house staff to move the town forward on all of these priorities. So I think I'm always asking for what's the next step. I think the next step here is to have Dave produce for us a staffing plan. What can he do and what can't he do and what does he need for the light board to do to make sure the staffing becomes sufficient to achieve the town's goals.
yeah,
I know
this is
that's costly, but we can just talk around this stuff forever. This is like, punching jello, as they say.
Yeah, so
like,
very much like the Energy Futures Task Force discussions around the creation of the Director of Sustainability. We needed to create a framework, and in order for that framework to work, we needed a point person within town government to lead that effort. So I see something like this role at CMLP for the strategic effort. I mean, I also want to stop for a moment and just acknowledge, Dave, you've done a lot compared to your peers. Compared to other MLPs, we are extremely demanding. We are very progressive, very forward-thinking, and it's when we look at other MLPs, this is not what they're experiencing. But it is what your customers are asking for, and that is what public power does, is it meets the needs of its customers. So it's hard because I really want to push for us to really accomplish these goals, but I keep seeing them slipping, and at the same time, I see why. We need to know that this town is progressive. This town wants these things, and we need to start adapting our business to meet them.
I just, for everyone's, I hate to cut you off, but we have 3 minutes left. And I know that will be a disappointment to a lot of the citizens that are here, but we do have a hard stop at 9 o'clock. I am not hearing necessarily consensus for a position on this article right now.
Well,
Just wait. And why I say not consensus, I think conceptually people are in support of the plan, but I think we need to qualify the support of that plan. And I don't feel like we have support of that. So I want to make sure I'm pretty crystal clear on what supporting this article means for us as a board. And if we need to qualify it because we need additional resources or how we're going to do that, I'm concerned we're not in agreement on that. I mean, and we could take a straw man if people are just generally in support. I'm willing to do that. And then we can talk about if we have qualifiers to that support. Does that make sense? Do we want to sort of just take a straw man and just sort of say in general we support?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fine.
So Brian, I think.
Oh, I'm in support of this article. I think I think the reason it's coming to town meeting is the frustration of missing, expectations. And I don't think it's necessarily the details of the article that's needed, but the focus on accomplishing the goals that were stated. So I'm in favor of the light board supporting this action.
Alice?
I'm also in support of Article 38.
Pam
I'm in support of Article 38.
and Gordon.
I am support of Article 38, particularly since it actually tosses the ball back into our court, staff and board, that we will be responsible for making a plan, making a statement, having a model, basically telling the town, assuring the town that we haven't forgotten about this. But it's in the context of a small operation that punches way above its weight. And I look at successful projects, for instance, in implementing the solar over at Grace. There was a tight deadline. We had to get that project done before the end of the year, or else we wouldn't get any SRECs for it. And you know, we did it. David, you did it. Good job. Okay, the implementation of the billing system. That was a tough, Carol, thank you so much. These are complex projects and they hit this small organization hard, and you guys take the burden. We can't ask too much of you guys. And I don't think that this article actually necessarily is going to overwhelm you. It's just an opportunity to put something on paper and say, look, we haven't forgotten about the town's interest in solar. We're going to have a plan to continue to consider it if it makes sense.
If it makes sense. Okay. So does the board want to take a vote on this?
I'm ready.
Okay, someone make a motion.
I move that we move affirmative action on Article 38.
Second.
Alice,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
and Gordon.
Yes.
And I'm going to vote against it. And because
Okay.
this is my concern over staff resources and what it means to have a plan. I'm concerned about the word schedule. And so I think there's opportunity here to come up with something that will be well supported by the petitioner. So, you know, I'm hopeful that that will be the outcome, but so we have to put it in support.
Thank you, Wendy, for voting your feelings and you know, being willing to be a dissenting vote. It's difficult on town committees for citizens to do that sometimes, and it's appreciated.
And maybe this is a moment where the board can step up and say, look, we're going to take this. We're going to we'll work offline and between meetings in order to make sure that something gets put together that's responsive and that takes some of the burden off of staff.
I think, I would say, well, I would not support that so much as pushing to get the light plant in a place where it can be able to respond to all the needs of the town on these emerging issues. And that gets into staffing the light plant properly. If it may be, and I'm greatly supportive of all the accomplishments of Dave and his staff over the years. I really am. But I think we're in an inflection point where the board needs to step up and help the light plant come into where it needs to be in terms of internal staffing.
And it will be our job to do that. So if we're voting in support, it's our job to make sure that Dave gets the resources he needs and that we manage this in a way that's going to make it successful, because we cannot afford to put the rest of our strategy at risk. So, I have to stop here. As I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, we have a hard stop at 9. Dave needs to leave. There are other members of the team that have to leave. So I'm going to apologize to the citizens, and I'll probably get a lot of heat for that. But I know people wanted a vote on this article, so we've had that vote. We can have additional follow-up and discussion at our next meeting, but I know people have to drop. So apologize to everyone for needing to stop the meeting and not entertain citizen comments, but we will take them in writing. So for the people who really want their voices heard, please forward them to us and we will make sure all the board members have them, and we will do some follow-up at our next meeting as needed. Okay.
Thanks, Wendy.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Alice, second.
I'll second.
Sorry. All right. Roll call. Alice,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Pam,
Yep.
Gordon,
Yes.
and Wendy approves. Thank you. All right. Talk again
Thank you.
in 2 weeks. Thank you all.
Thank you all.